So, what if the deepest spiritual enlightenment a human being can achieve isn't, found in decades of silent mountaintop meditation?
Which is like the classic image we all have.
Exactly. But what if it's actually found in the most intense, purely physical, flesh and blood experience imaginable?
I mean, it sounds almost blasphemous when you frame it that way. We are just so conditioned to separate the sacred from the profane.
Oh, completely.
We put pure light and ethereal vibrations in one nice little box, and then we put this sweaty, visceral reality of the human body in a completely different box and just lock it away in the basement.
Yeah, and that separation is exactly what we are challenging for you today. We're taking a deep dive into a very short but incredibly provocative spiritual and philosophical essay.
Very provocative.
The author is Hu Feng. The piece is dated August 1st, 2023, and it's titled The Pathway to the Pure Land, which is also translated as Elysium or Paradise. And the mission of this deep dive is to explore how this text uses a universally understood, raw physical experience to decode a dense, abstract, spiritual concept that usually just leaves people entirely lost. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, to really understand the pathway being described here, we first have to, we have to understand the destination.
Makes sense.
We need to look at how Suifeng actually defines this Elysium, or the Pure Land, because it sets the stakes for literally everything that follows.
And what's interesting is the text describes this destination largely by what is missing from it. Like, Elysium is defined as a world entirely devoid of sorrow.
Wow, yeah.
There's no anxiety, no confusion, no worry, and absolutely no fear. It specifically mentions something called the Fairy Island Archipelago as this region within this world, and it's filled only with joy, pleasure, comfort, and excitement.
I mean, just think about the psychological weight of that description for a second. If you remove anxiety, worry, and fear, you are essentially removing the entire baseline operating system of the human condition.
Yeah, it's true.
From an evolutionary standpoint, we're biologically wired to be anxious. Like, fear keeps you from walking off a cliff.
Right, or getting eaten by a bear.
Exactly. Worry ensures you gather enough food for the winter. Anxiety is literally a survival mechanism.
So to reach a destination where those mechanisms are just completely gone means you have to fundamentally alter how your consciousness operates. You can't just, walk into a place of pure joy carrying your everyday hypervigilant human brain.
You probably ruin the vibe immediately.
You definitely would. Which brings us to the barrier to entry. The text states that the only channel to enter this paradise requires achieving a state of emptiness, formlessness, and no self.
And there's the massive roadblock, emptiness. It's this concept that forms the backbone of so many Eastern philosophies, yet it actively resists human language.
Because language itself is the problem, right?
Yes, words are, by definition, forms. They're basically just labels we slap onto things so we can categorize them. So how do you use a form to describe formlessness?
You really can't, and Zhuifeng openly admits this in the essay. The text literally states that emptiness is incredibly difficult to explain or describe with words. It simply has to be experienced.
Yeah.
It actually makes me think about trying to explain the concept of a mirror to someone who has been blind since birth or who has just never seen a reflection.
Oh, that is a remarkably precise way to frame the problem.
Right. Like, you could describe the physical object all day long. You could talk about the coldness of the glass, the dimensions of the wooden frame.
The metallic silver coating on the back.
Exactly. But the actual function of the mirror, the fact that its inherent nature is to be completely empty so that it can reflect whatever is placed in front of it, is something words just bounce right off of. You just have to see it working to understand it.
What's fascinating here is how the author deliberately sets up this intellectual impossibility right out of the gate.
Oh, how so?
By openly stating that words will fail, the author is sort of disarming your analytical brain. You're basically being told, hey, you cannot think your way into emptiness. Logic will not save you here. You have to abandon the intellect and look toward pure sensory experience.
But the author still has to give the reader a bridge, right? Like, if intellectual words fail to describe emptiness, what tangible experience can you actually point to so the reader goes, oh, okay, I know what that feels like?
And this is where the essay takes a very, very unexpected turn.
Yeah, it does.
To bridge this massive conceptual gap, the author uses the experience of extreme sexual climax.
It's quite a jolt when you first read it. I mean, the author is using the absolute peak of sexual climax to explain the spiritual state of emptiness.
And they do not hold back.
Not at all. And the text doesn't just mention it in passing either. It deeply analyzes the psychology of that specific moment. The author highlights several distinct markers of this peak experience, describing it first as an awakening and the beginning of life.
The word awakening is doing a lot of heavy lifting there, I think.
Yeah.
We usually reserve that term for like a monk achieving nirvana after years of asceticism.
Right.
But here, it is applied to the peak of physical arousal.
Mm-hmm.
It suggests a sudden, I don't know, a snapping into a sharper, more vital reality.
Yeah, and that snaps right into another marker the text brings up, which is waking from the fog of everyday life and transcending the ego through sexual arousal. And I actually want to linger on that fog for a second.
Let's do it.
Because that fog is the mental chatter. It's the emails you haven't sent, the awkward conversation you had 3 days ago, the dread about your electric bill.
In neuroscience, there's actually a concept for this. It's called the default mode network.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's the network of interacting brain regions that is active when you are not focused on the outside world.
Mm-hmm.
So when you are daydreaming, ruminating, worrying about the past or the future, it is literally where the ego lives.
Wow.
And what the author is observing here is that extreme, overwhelming sensory input essentially forces the default mode network to just shut down.
Because your brain simply doesn't have the bandwidth to process the intensity of the physical sensation while simultaneously, like, worrying about your electric bill.
Exactly. The sensory overload yanks you violently out of the fog of the past and future and pins you entirely in the present millisecond.
Which perfectly explains the text's observation about leaving the physical body and spirit and no longer caring about what usually seems important to the self.
Right.
In that moment, the things you define your identity by, your job title, your social status, your insecurities, they completely evaporate.
This also raises an important question about the perception of time. The text describes this moment poetically as a pause in life, an instant of eternity through the intense fusion of tasting the flesh.
Time dilation. Yeah, I think anyone listening can relate to the strange psychological phenomenon where the normal ticking clock of reality just stops.
It is the ultimate flow state. When the ego shuts down, your internal timekeeper shuts down with it. You aren't anticipating the next second or regretting the previous one.
You're just there.
Exactly. And finally, the text notes a strange sensation of another dimension of self drifting away from life's anchor point.
Okay, I have to step in and push back here for a second because I imagine you listening might be feeling a bit of philosophical whiplash right now.
Fair enough.
The premise is intriguing, but doesn't this seem entirely contradictory? If the ultimate goal is a non-physical spiritual paradise, how do you get there by focusing on the absolute ultimate form of physical indulgence?
It sounds like a trap, right?
It does. Aren't we just replacing spiritual discipline with a dopamine addiction? I mean, if people follow this logic, wouldn't they just become addicted to the flesh rather than moving past it?
That is hands down the most common pitfall when interpreting texts like this.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like a massive loophole, a justification for just pure hedonism. But if you look closely at what the author is actually doing, they are brilliantly stripping away the physical act itself to isolate the psychological aftermath.
Wait, so you're saying the physical act isn't the point at all?
Not at all. The flesh is merely the vehicle. The author is definitely not saying the physical act is the spiritual state.
Okay, that clarifies things.
Yeah, they're using the flesh as a universally accessible, undeniable proof of concept. The goal is to demonstrate a psychological state where the body and the mind temporarily vanish from our awareness. During that peak experience, the intense sensory overload forces a system crash.
Like a forced reboot of the consciousness.
Yes. And in that tiny fraction of a second where the system is rebooting, there is no you. There's only the experience.
Wow.
That blank space, that profound absence of the worried, anxious, calculating self, is the closest earthly approximation of what emptiness actually feels like.
That distinction changes everything. It's not an instruction manual to go out and chase the physical act. It's pointing to a memory you already have to prove a point.
Exactly.
And the text really leans into this by actively interrogating the reader. Schueffing turns the lens directly on the audience, asking them to reflect on their own past experiences during a peak sexual climax.
It's a very effective rhetorical device. The author is basically forcing you to look at a highly intimate subjective memory and analyze it as objective psychological data.
And the questions are extremely pointed. The author asks, did you completely ignore the existence of your partner? Now that sounds incredibly selfish or even harsh on the surface.
It does, yeah.
But in the context of what we're discussing, it means the boundary between self and other completely dissolves.
Right. The duality of the universe breaks down. It is no longer me observing you. There is only the unified event.
Then the text asks, did you forget all of your daily troubles, sorrows, and pains? We touched on this with the fog clearing, but the mechanism here is profound.
It really is.
Your physical pain or emotional sorrow doesn't cease to exist in reality, but your attachment to it is severed.
Because the entity that usually holds on to those sorrows, the ego, has stepped out of the room.
Yes. Which brings us to the most crucial question the author poses. Did you completely ignore your own existence? Did you feel boundless, uncontainable pleasure?
That is the crux of the entire essay right there. In that exact moment, the self goes offline. The author states that this psychological disappearance, this exact sensation of self-loss, is the state of emptiness.
It is a state of a completely relaxed, carefree mind. And the text makes a monumental claim here. It states that in this moment, the normal you vanishes and another self is born.
We are crossing the bridge now. We're moving from the physical analogy of human intimacy into the profound spiritual mechanics of actually achieving Elysium.
So what does this all mean for the listener? I mean, is the author suggesting that recalling this physical act is the literal mechanism to transport yourself to the Fairy Island archipelago?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the text is clearly using this as a tangible, earthly model. The peak physical experience is proof that humans are naturally capable of achieving a state of no self.
Right.
It proves to your logical, skeptical brain that you can exist without your ego, even if just for a few fleeting seconds.
It's basically demonstrating that the hardware is already installed.
Precisely. And that proof is necessary because this exact mechanism, this no self, is the mandatory requirement to permanently enter Elysium. The physical act gives you a temporary glimpse through the keyhole.
I like that.
Yeah, the spiritual practice of emptiness is learning how to unlock the door, open it, and walk through it without needing the sensory overload to force it open.
That is a phenomenal way to put it. You aren't supposed to stare at the keyhole forever. You're supposed to realize what's on the other side.
Exactly.
This brings us to the final, dense philosophical conclusion of Woofing's text. Emptiness is described as both the channel and the Dharma gate to Elysium.
We should probably pause and define that term for the listener, just in case.
Absolutely. So for anyone who isn't steeped in Buddhist terminology, a Dharma gate is essentially a portal. It's a specific teaching, method, or practice that provides an entryway to enlightenment.
Right.
Think of it as a customized doorway. There are thousands of Dharma gates because different people need different methods to break through their illusions. Here, the author is saying that emptiness is the ultimate doorway.
But stepping through that doorway requires navigating a massive paradox.
Right, because at the end of the source material, the text drops this heavy philosophical riddle. No ego leads to ego, and no ego is the true ego.
It's a brain twister.
It is. The author even references another one of their works to hammer this home, stating, you cannot become a Buddha if you have an ego.
No ego is the true ego. It sounds like a total contradiction. If you have no ego, how can you have a true ego?
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. Normally, we think of our ego as our entire identity, like who are we without it? But think about your everyday consciousness like an overloaded computer processor.
Oh, I like this analogy.
Thanks. So your everyday ego is running like 50 heavy background applications at once. Social anxiety, career ambitions, fear of judgment, memories of past embarrassments. All that processing power is being eaten up by survival mechanisms.
The system is sluggish. It's overheating just trying to maintain the illusion of who you think you're supposed to be.
Exactly. To achieve emptiness, you have to do a hard reboot. You have to completely force quit all of those background applications. You have to clear the RAM completely.
Right.
That is achieving no self or no ego. But you don't destroy the computer by rebooting it. Once you clear out all that exhausting, unnecessary software, the pure, incredibly fast, pristine operating system underneath is finally free to run.
The core system.
Yeah, that clean operating system is the true self. You can't access the true self until you forcefully close out the everyday anxious ego.
I love that analogy because it dispels the most common misconception about Eastern philosophy.
Which one?
Well, people often hear terms like emptiness or no self, and they just assume the goal is to become nothingness. They think enlightenment means becoming a hollowed-out zombie with no personality or desires.
Just a completely blank slate floating in a void somewhere.
Exactly. But the text is arguing the exact opposite. Emptiness isn't about becoming nothing. It's about shedding a crushing burden. Think about walking around in the middle of summer wearing a heavy, soaking, wet winter coat. Truly, that coat is the everyday ego. It requires constant maintenance, it's exhausting to carry around, and it isolates you from the environment. By shedding that coat, by achieving emptiness, the true self emerges.
And according to the text, what is the nature of this true self once the coat is off? It is a self that only knows joy, pleasure, comfort, and excitement.
It's the self that is finally light enough to reside in the Fairy Island archipelago. You don't lose yourself in emptiness. You finally uncover the authentic version of yourself that isn't weighed down by fear. You have to lose the artificial self to find the true ego.
It is a remarkable conceptual journey this text takes us on. I mean, we started with this deep, universal human desire for a destination, Elysium, a pure land totally free of sorrow and anxiety.
Yeah.
Then we hit the massive roadblock, the requirement of emptiness, a concept so abstract it just defies language.
And then, rather than leaving us stranded in abstract philosophy, the author expertly pivots. They bring us crashing back down to earth, grounding this lofty spiritual concept in the visceral, undeniable reality of a sexual peak experience.
They use the extreme of the physical body to prove the existence of the pure spirit, showing us that we all actually know what it feels like to lose our ego.
We really do.
We know what it feels like to step outside of time and forget our worries entirely, even if we've only ever experienced it for a fleeting fraction of a second.
It fundamentally demystifies the spiritual journey. It tells you that paradise isn't some alien, unreachable landscape that you have to completely rewire your humanity to adapt to.
Right.
It is a state of being that you have already tasted.
Yeah.
You already possess the mechanism for liberation inside your own mind.
And for you listening, it is a powerful reminder that ultimate spiritual freedom might not require scaling a mountain to find a guru. It might just feel a lot like the most intense moments of physical release you've already experienced in your own life.
Yeah.
Those rare, blinding moments where the you that worries, the you that stresses over the future, simply ceases to exist.
It is a radical, almost subversive reframing of what it means to be spiritually awake. It suggests the sacred is hidden right in the center of the profane.
It really is, and it leaves us with something incredibly profound to chew on as we wrap up this deep dive.
I'm ready.
If the closest earthly taste we have to eternal paradise is a fleeting, intense moment where we completely forget our own existence, what does that say about the heavy burden of identity we choose to carry around every single day?
Wow.
Is our constant, exhausting need to be someone, to defend our opinions, build our reputations, and protect our egos actually the very lock keeping us out of our own paradise?